Donald Trump ran. He ran on, I would say, a lot of stuff. We all know that his campaign was a lot more than the media whittled it down to, but at least we were told that it was reasonable for people to vote for him because it was the economy. Okay, and we've explained how the misdiagnosis really confused people of where the problems were coming from and how they were being managed or whatever. And then you had immigration. Okay, those were coined as the two issues. So one of the major issues, the economy, affordability. You'd think that even if he messed up his governance on the economy, he'd at least have a certain level of sympathy, that people were upset that it went from a much more stable economic environment to a crazy multiple, trade war on all fronts and economic uncertainty in the market struggling. And instead of having sympathy, he has a level of hostility and rage towards people who would dare to hold him to the standard that he set. To discuss a post that is pure panic from him, I want to bring in Josiah from Pondering Politics. Great to have you with me, Josiah.
It's great to be with you. And I'm just saying, Luke, before we get into this, listen, you have no right to complain about the economy when a Republican's in charge. That's the theme for this. I'm trying not to spoil it, okay? But you selfish voters thinking that you have the right to criticize somebody for not upholding major promises or commitments is just absurd, Luke.
And getting to what it is that Josiah is referencing there, Newsweek reports, shut up about price of eggs. This is Trump reposting a, again, wildly hostile article that's literally telling people to shut up about the metric that MAGA said was the metric of Biden's failure. That was their standard, they said. And now Charlie Kirk wrote an article saying, shut up about the price of eggs, and Trump reposted it. On Sunday, Donald Trump shared an article written by conservative activist Charlie Kirk on his Truth Social account that called for Americans to shut up about rising egg prices and acknowledged the president's efforts to lower inflation. And it goes on to blame, obviously, as we've heard, Biden for everything and ignore the very real data that's slapping us in the face over and over again, revealing, okay, egg prices is a very complicated picture. What got us here? Fine. But the broader instability is so directly connected to they credit themselves with a really aggressive first few weeks, including the trade war, including the mass layoffs, including the cutting off of federal funds to organizations that need it to employ people. And all of this is leading to panic within MAGA, thinking that the one thing that gave them political capital, wrongly, Americans misassessed what the correct candidate was if they cared about the economy, but that is where MAGA got a lot of its political capital. And now they're throwing it all away instantly because Trump genuinely doesn't understand or is doing something crazy with his economic approach. So before getting on to a bunch of other stuff, Josiah, okay, we could talk, and both of us have, so we don't need to rehash it all. I feel like some of these things get redundant because we go through it so much. But yes, we can fact check the claims about where the blame goes and explain the data, explain the GDP now shift and the outlook and the consumer sentiment shifts and the tariffs on businesses. But even aside from that, what do you make of, we talked about this already together, but what do you make of, aside from the substance, the tone directed towards people saying, shut up about that thing that we told you we were going to be good for?
Classic Trump. I mean, listen, when I hear people talk about, how Trump is plain spoken and how he understands me, there are some things about Trump that I do understand academically, even if I don't agree with. But this idea that he's a creature of empathy has always rang hollow to me. Like he was born into privilege. He's a real estate billionaire. He's also inflated his net worth as a consequence of his political career. I mean, my God, the meme coin, which might be the most singular, greatest act of political financial corruption we've ever seen. I mean, this guy has nothing in common with the average person, with people who, live paycheck to paycheck. So yeah, the tone of just shut up, that's Trump in a nutshell, right? I mean, Trump has never been a creature of empathy. Trump has only ever, I mean, my God, Luke, now you say that and I'm thinking to myself, Didn't he even say during the campaign, during a speech or whatever, he's like, I don't care about you, I just want your vote. And everybody in the audience laughed. He wasn't joking, right? Sometimes Trump says things, even though he's an inveterate liar, I think either by sheer accident or maybe to even play games with his own base. Like, I just want to see how far I can take it. Sometimes he'll let things slip about the relationship he has with his base. He famously said, of course, he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. And I think that was a prophecy. I think that he was accurately assessing his relationship with his base. And then when he says stuff like, I don't care about you, I need your vote, I also think that that's the truth. He's just telling people the truth and just to see how they react. And of course, the most diehard and devout of the cult, they laugh along. And so when he says, shut up about the price of it, and listen, I'll say this. Did Charlie Kirk write the article? Yes. But when Donald Trump retweets something, you are absolutely entitled to take it as endorsement. Donald Trump told you to shut up about the price of eggs. Now, again, imagine if that had been Joe Biden. Please, just imagine. Just imagine. Yeah.
It would have been,
Imagine if it's Joe Biden now. Imagine if it's Joe Biden. He's not even president. Imagine if he says, shut up about the price of eggs.
And guess what? In the case of him, he shouldn't have said that. He didn't say that. He wouldn't say it. But he'd have a better justification to say it because of the comparison of how this country was handling related issues post-pandemic to other ones. And we had an existential democratic crisis. So you could say, who cares about the price of eggs whenever democracy is on the line? Eggs are going to matter when we don't have a democratic state in our government because the way that we solve problems like egg prices through policy, through our government, through our democracy. And so Biden could have said, we have an existential democratic crisis. Shut up about all of these random things, even though they're important to people. And he wouldn't say that. And you can have both a care for the economic issues and a care for our democracy. But he actually would have had more of a justification than mother-loving Trump does, Josiah.
Two things, because I know we want to move on, but two things I want to say there. Number one, I'm just thinking about this. In this scenario, Donald Trump is president. Charlie Kirk says, shut up about the price of eggs. Donald Trump retweets it. Joe Biden emerges from the shadows and says, yeah, actually, shut up about the price of eggs. Then Charlie Kirk would write a second editorial saying, how dare you tell me to shut up about the price of eggs, Joe Biden? But then the other thing I want to say is when you said democratic existential crisis, were you making a pun? Existential? You did. You made a pun there. I'm sorry. I just want to give you your flowers there. Like what he did. That was the pun of the year. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, that pun is worth its weight in gold, which is what you'll need to buy eggs under Donald Trump, quite frankly. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's so tragic. Okay, so quickly, Trump is now going to go, what are you asking me about groceries for? What are you asking me about eggs for? What are you asking me about affordability for? Remember this.
The eggs are coming down and the bacon's coming down. Everything is coming down.
The word grocery, it's sort of simple word, but it sort of means like everything you eat.
So when I win, I will immediately bring prices down starting on day one. I heard something that was very interesting. The word grocery. It's sort of such a strange and simple, nice word. I'm going out for groceries today. I hear so much about the word groceries. I used to use groceries a lot. It's like sort of an old-fashioned word, groceries.
The stomach is speaking. It always does.
It's a very simple word, groceries. I started using the groceries when you buy apples, when you buy bacon.
I tell a story about a woman. She got 3 apples, and she brought them up to the cash register, and she looked at the woman, and she said, is that the right price? And the woman said, yes, ma'am, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. And she took one of the 3 apples and she brought it back to the refrigeration and she paid for 2 apples instead of 3. That should not be happening in our country. That should not be happening here. It's not going to happen here.
I don't know. It is, I said this to Jaden. It's kind of weird that after Trump tried to steal the election for himself in 2020, it was clear that you really couldn't do anything else to win my support, right? Because unless the person he was running against tried to steal like 6 elections, then that's the foundational issue. And so I'm going to have to oppose someone who's anti-democratic enough that they would do what he did after the 2020 election. But it's weird that just so happened to pair. And this, I think, could quite literally be the saving grace for our democracy in a really twisted way, with an economically illiterate person. Being a threat to democracy doesn't mean you also have to misunderstand tariffs, but he just happens to have both. And so I think Americans have a really difficult time sometimes tapping into the importance of opposing Trump's unlawful acts or the MAGA movement's anti-democratic beliefs. But because a totally separate issue, it's not connected, but it's totally separate, it seems separate, which is his economic illiteracy. That's what's going to drive people to the polls against the Republican Party in upcoming elections. And so it's a very weird scenario to be in, where I feel so bad about what he's doing. But we have to motivate ourselves to seize on the moment and make sure people understand who is doing what to them. And I think the fact that he's botching the big issue that he ran on will be our moment to really defeat this MAGA movement, because it will combine people's motivations and their ability to tap into the importance of opposing the authoritarianism, but also the group of people who are only voting on prices. And so while I wish the price issue wasn't what it was, I wish he was more economically stable and it had a more wise governance on that. We can't control that, but we can control our messaging and making sure people get it, that on both fronts, Trump's messing everything up and we need to rally around opposing him.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer. As you know, we've had both professional conversations about this, personal conversations as friends. But, I believe the facts don't speak for themselves. And I think that the Democratic Party writ large, and much of Democratic-aligned media, or Democratic-friendly media, let's say, operates under this impression, well, okay, the American people will notice that cost of living prices are higher, grocery and gas prices are higher, and they'll draw the connection and blame Trump accordingly. I think given the stakes, and given the aggressive moves by the Trump administration and their allies in the Republican Party to further exploit their institutional advantages, I think that we should just assume that facts don't speak for themselves, which I think is the correct thing to do. And I think that Democrats, not just people, again, who are aligned with Democrats in the media like you and me, but actual elected officials need to continue to hammer this point. Now, one caveat I would say is don't just refer to egg prices. I think it might have been Dan Pfeiffer from Pod Save America who made the point, like, if you just specifically point to egg prices, then perhaps egg prices will eventually go down somewhat, in which case people will use that as the metric of Trump's success. It's groceries writ large. Eggs is just perhaps the most iconic example. We have to point out this is happening on Trump's watch. Trump's logic and the Republican logic during the 2024 campaign, and even before, was that anything bad that happened on Joe Biden's watch was because of Joe Biden. Ergo, Joe Biden and his party should accrue a political consequence. If you didn't want the sun to rise the next morning and it rose when Joe Biden was president, that was Joe Biden's fault, and you should blame him for it, right? That was the logic, even if you couldn't tie it to direct policy prescriptions. Now, here we have the benefit of being able to do that. The fact of the matter is Trump is not moving aggressively to take control of the avian flu situation. As a matter of fact, he has purged much of the national health institutions here in the United States, put somebody like RFK in charge, which doesn't exactly instill confidence. So that is a policy decision that the Trump administration is making. But even if it weren't, again, this is happening on Trump's watch, and Democrats are perfectly entitled, and I would argue politically obligated, to blame Trump for it, because that is the standard created by Republicans, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We're starting to see Democratic elected officials, not just you making your safaris out, Luke, again, to the grocery stores, which I love, and they're going viral, but we also have elected officials trying to draw connections as well, using the bully pulpit to do it. We're seeing inflation skyrocket on Trump's watch. Again, the Trump trade war, this is all feeding in together, a painful and unnecessary trade war that he's triggered with our three biggest trading partners for absolutely no reason. And then, of course, he's walking the tariffs back. That's also creating uncertainty. So it's not just the tariff or its imposition, but it's the threat of the tariff as well. And yes, we're seeing signs of a recession. And you'll recall that Republicans during Biden's administration were thirsty for a recession. They were eagerly anticipating it, like salivating at the notion, because then they could use it to blame Biden. Now, I'm not hoping for a recession because it's going to hurt everybody, myself included, you, everybody. Recessions will hurt the American people. But if it comes, then we have to draw the connection to Trump and make sure that in the midterms, Trump pays a political price for it. And I hope that Democrats will have learned their lesson from this last election and work aggressively to do just that.
Absolutely. Well said. Josiah, where can people find you?
They can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics, one word. Appreciate the invitation, Luke. I'm glad we got to unpack this together, this existential crisis, as you said, and hopefully it won't remain that way for very long.
All right, it's time for you to exit.